Hi and welcome to another Cycloid webcast. Today, Olivier and I are going to talk about how to distinguish yourself from the field by using an IDP and partnering with an IDP provider. So we're going to cover topics such as automation, infrastructure as code, cloud adoption, productivity, and also FinOps. If we have time, we might even touch on some of the carbon footprint and GreenOps subjects. We'll see how we go. The agenda we've got planned is to start by just talking about the challenges for MSPs, a little bit about our history. Then we're going to dive into what an IDP is and how it helps. And then Olivier will take over and he'll really dive into the use cases and perhaps some real life customer examples as well. So let's get started. So our background, the Cycloid was created from our founder's background working in a system integrator and managed service provider. So they were working with a large number of developers, over 300 DevOps and associated teams, and managing over 5,000 applications. So a reasonably large provider. They're also working in a world that was changing quite quickly. They were working with some of what we could probably consider legacy now, so sort of OpenStack and VMware type technologies, as well as helping customers move into the more modern world of public cloud, and then layering on top of those the PaaSes and the container services, which we're all familiar with now. And they're also working with many different types of customers. So there was customers who are very much still in the sort of waterfall methodology and trying to move into DevOps. They had customers who were full on into DevOps and had a well established DevOps process. And then they had customers who were sort of halfway in, halfway out, but also were using some outsourcing as well. So there was a lot of complexity to dealing with the customers, and I'm sure that's pretty much a familiar story for most managed service providers and integrators trying to manage with sort of legacy, as well as helping organizations transform and adopt more sort of modern digital services. So from that experience, we identified some typical problems, and these problems were ones that created the need for an IDP and created a different way of addressing these issues. So primarily among those was lack of reusability. And what I'm talking about is basically constantly reinventing the wheel. So a team might try and build some automation to help them deliver an application quickly, but then that automation would end up in somebody's Git, and it would be inaccessible to the rest of the organization. So next time a similar project would then start recreating all that automation all over again. So a huge amount of inefficiency there. Add to that the governance side of it. So if you do create some sort of automation, how do you ensure that that's used correctly and people aren't allowed to, for instance, spin up huge instances when only a small instance is required for testing, and those kind of controls around best practices for what ports should be open, all the sort of things that you would expect an experienced DevOps person to know. But if you're going to pass those tools on and just allow them accessible to everybody, then it's quite possible that they could possibly cause problems and maybe even violate some sort of policies. So lots of problems there with reusability. Add to that the issue around hiring and retaining people. So if you look at LinkedIn today, you'll see there's over 250,000 open opportunities in the DevOps world. So there's a lot of competition to hire really good DevOps people. And then once you've hired them, there's also the challenge of retaining them and giving them a good experience. And we talk about the developer experience, the DevOps, as we go through, because it's really a crucial point, and one which an IDP looks to help with. So the customer side of it, there was also the difficulty with GitOps. Everybody's going down the GitOps route, and that's exactly the right way to go. Git is definitely the way to manage your code. But again, that creates problems in itself. An unmanaged GitOps strategy can end up with thousands of repos all over the place in an organization that no human can keep track of. You just can't find what you need. It's just too difficult to structure. So, and again, it's a challenge which is solved with an IDP. Then layer on top of that the tools. So Gartner says there's an average of 28 tools in use. Again, this is a huge amount for anybody to try and understand. Giving everybody access to the tools and then expecting them to know how to use them it's really unmanageable. So the idea is absolutely allow your teams to use their tools they're familiar with, but put some governance around it, put some guardrails so those tools can be used in a way that meets your policies, but also allows people to have the flexibility to use what they want to use. And again, this is a kind of when you're looking at IDPs and making your decision, one of the things to look for is a tool that's open, that allows your teams to use what they're familiar with, but bring it together in a way that has repeatability and governance around it. And the last piece is really around becoming a DevOps. It's a long journey, typically 3 years. One of the goals that we have, and one of the things that we try and help organizations is to upskill their teams by putting processes in place that allow people to adopt DevOps processes and methodologies, even if they're not fully up to speed on DevOps. So we have a philosophy of gather all that intelligence you've got from your really skilled team, but make it available to everybody else, and then that way you by osmosis, you'll effectively upskill your team. So they were some of the challenges that we identified earlier on. And these are what we see, these are what we're hearing. So I'll run through some of these and just talk about how we've addressed them, and also how an IDP would address them. So reducing the time to delivery between your teams is basically one of the big goals of an IDP. The idea is to break down the silos and join your teams up. So giving your teams the ability to build and run your applications without having to go to lots of different places. So there's this concept of this cognitive switching, reducing the cognitive load on your developers. So they go to one place and everything is there. They don't need to think about where have I got to go to get this development tool, where have I got to go to deploy my infrastructure. Everything is available for them in one place. And this reducing of the cognitive load is, again, something which is a factor in the developer experience. If you can make it easier, it's obviously a more enjoyable experience for a developer. So that was one of the big challenges that we see today. Stop doing only custom projects. This really talks to the repeatability. Having your automation captured in a way that it can be reused across your organization is a real challenge. We believe that you should be able to treat your automation in a similar way as you would treat your code. So take a GitOps approach to it. So you've got automation, it's stored in your Git, it can be used, you can apply version control to it, you can allow other teams to use it, to clone it, and then commit it back again. So you've got this whole innovation going on within your team. So you've got that reproducibility, which obviously will create efficiency because everybody's not trying to constantly recreate the same automation. And then you want to do this without losing control, and this is where the guardrails come into it. So having governance on your automation allows you to share it more freely, because you're not worried that the automation is going to go and spin up 25 massive AWS instances, and you're going to be landed with a $10,000 bill this month just because somebody didn't understand what the automation was doing. So yes, you want to be able to share the automation, but you need to do it in a way that has some guidelines and some controls around it. And then we talk about collaboration and rework. We have a concept of stacks. The concept of the stack is you bring everything regarding how an application is deployed into one place, and then you can allow your teams to collaborate on that automation in a way that can be shared. So effectively, you create a self-service catalog of automation. and your teams can go. They know where to find those stacks. They can then take them, use them, and they will be available to anybody that's got access to the platform. Ticketing is another big problem that we see. If you look at how most organizations work, they will have siloed teams. Each team will have its own ticketing system. For instance, the developer will require some infrastructure to be able to do their job. They'll then go to the operations team. They'll open a ticket with that team. That team will service that ticket, and that ticket will have an internal SLA. Now, what we see is the SLA of the individual teams typically is how fast you can deploy your application. So if you start to have multiple teams all with different SLAs, you then end up with this compound effect of the synchronous process and all these SLAs. So once it's gone through the infrastructure team, it's gone through the security team, it's gone through maybe the FinOps team, each with their own SLA. You can see how that would really increase the time and frustration for a developer to get their job done. So we really believe that self-service is a way to solve this. A well-organized and well set up platform will give the developers access to the tools and resources they need without having to open a ticket and wait for those tickets to be serviced by other teams within the organization. And we talk about an industrialized approach between teams. So this is the ability to be able to take those stacks and use them both with your internal teams and perhaps with your external, your customers as well. One of the features, which is really quite important of an IDP, is that it's got the ability to do multiple organizations. So you could perhaps have internal organizations and external organizations, but you've got this industrial scale security and operations, which allow you to be able to share everything you've created in a way that's secure. And then finally, the challenge of FinOps. This has really become a hot topic at the moment, and it's sort of it dovetails in a little bit with the green agenda as well. If you can use less, it's going to be cheaper, but it's also going to be great for the environment. The less servers we're running, the less energy we're using, the less pollution we're creating. So FinOps has become a real hot topic at the moment. And what's interesting about this is it's one of the topics that's now being shifted left into the developers, where developers were used to obviously developing code and running their own tests, etc. They're now also being asked to take a bit of responsibility for the cost of their architecture and how they're developing, and allowing your developers to have the tools to, for instance, be able to estimate how much some code is going to cost to be deployed in a certain cloud, even before they deploy it, is a really nice feature, and again, it gives the developers the control, and it makes you more efficient, and it saves money. And anything that saves money and makes you more efficient, it's got to be great. So FinOps is a really important part. So those are just a summary of some of the challenges we see from both ourselves and from managed service providers that we're talking to. So this is what we're proposing as a way to work with us, and some of the advantages that you have when working with an IDP provider. You can address the challenges that you're seeing from your customers around DevOps. So being able to give them turnkey solutions. Part of that you can work in obviously training and how you can upskill those organizations to take advantage of the capabilities that a self-service portal and an IDP will create. We're agnostic when it comes to cloud, so you can maximize the different types of cloud operations. It's irrelevant which cloud you use. Again, it's a very important feature when looking at IDPs is to make sure that you can deploy not just all the leading public clouds, but also there's a lot of VMware still out there. There's OpenStack. There's a lot of private clouds. So having a platform that allows you to deploy anyway is really important, and one that also builds in the FinOps view, not just the FinOps view for public cloud, where you can you can quite easily pull down that data and analyze it, but also where you may want to do internal cross-charging, the ability to set quotas for different departments can be very useful as well. So the whole budget control piece is a real value add, and could offset obviously the costs of engaging an MSP and investing in an IDP. And then promote governance. There's a lot of highly regulated industries out there, and this is a key that if you're going to allow teams to self-serve, then you've got to have guardrails in place. You've got to have the ability to not just control, but also observe what's happening. Create a multi-tenant platform, be able to then look and see who's using that platform. Look for things such as drift. So our infrastructure being deployed that's not being used, and you're not aware of it. That's one of the key features that's important. As well as just generally allowing your developers to have a view on what's going on, and if things are suddenly changing and you're suddenly seeing a huge amount of usage in a certain area, be able to dive in there and have a look. So, and that's one, and this is how you can differentiate yourself against everybody else, by offering these services. So this is what we typically see with organisations. There's a kind of pattern that they follow. You start with developers and operations into two completely siloed teams, completely opposite sides of the fence. DevOps is then adopted to try and create efficiency, join these teams up, and it's absolutely the right way to go. It has all the right goals. It should improve communication. It should break down silos. But in reality, what tends to happen is you end up with a third team of specialists who are trying to glue everything together. And this team then identify the problem that there is a disconnect amongst now three teams, and how do they solve it? And what we've seen is, and it happens quite often, is somebody typically in the DevOps team will come up with the idea of building a portal. Then a team will be created around building this portal. It effectively is a basic IDP with the goal to bridge all the teams, allow the automation to be shared. And this can create a kind of shadow IT situation where some of your very smartest and best DevOps engineers are effectively running the portal. And we've seen this. We've got examples where four full-time engineers are being sucked out and actually being used just to maintain the portal, which obviously is not a great use of the time. So this then leads to the question of, should we build or buy a more comprehensive IDP? We've actually got a completely separate talk on this. So if build versus buy is something that you're interested in around the idea of an IDP, then look up the Cycloid build versus buy webcast, because we cover this in detail. But that typically is a question that comes up at this point once you've discovered that there's quite a lot of resources required to build and maintain an IDP that's servicing many individuals and sometimes customers as well. So what is an IDP? So an IDP is designed, built and maintained primarily by the platform team. And we've got some very defined functions that we would expect to see within an IDP. So it should provide self-service, number one. Absolutely needs to do that. It should have the ability to set governance, to allow role-based access controls for its users. It has the goal of decreasing tickets, so that's again aligned to self. You should be able to repeat the automation and share the automation, and it should have a GitOps approach, so you can do version control and everything that you'd expect to be able to do with a Git system. So that's the platform team's responsibility. Then on the end user side, we would expect it to be able to empower them by self-service, and by that we mean they should be able to find what they need to do their job. So they go to one place, relieve the cognitive load, be able to find what you need to do your job and get on with your job without having to wait for lots of other people to serve you up with the things that you need. Interact with the tools that you need. Again, these should be the tools you're familiar with. The IDP should be able to interact with your tools and interact in a way that they allow you to control, access, and add governance. And the final piece, which I did mention earlier, is giving end users who don't have full DevOps skills the ability to use the IDP. And the way we go about that is by we have a concept of forms, and in the form you can expose the variables that you wish certain users to have. So those variables might be things like the size of an instance they can spin up, or what ports are open, or what credentials are available when an application is deployed, and the user of the platform could just fill this form in, and they don't really need to know too much what's going on in the background, but they can just get their application deployed and get on with their job. So that's the user of the platform. So just a little bit before I hand over about market insights. So we've been talking about IDPs for a couple of years now, and DevOps itself has been a subject for over 10 years, but for the last 5 years, so the DevOps reports pretty much said the same thing, which is 80% of organizations are struggling with adoption. And clearly it's a difficult concept for organizations to adjust. There's a lot more in it than just the piece we're talking about. There's obviously the culture pieces and general ways of working, which are very difficult for organizations. But having the right tools and having something like an IDP, we believe, is a platform to allow that change and allow adoption. And it's not just us saying this. This is from Gartner. This is very recent from Gartner this year. And they're saying next year, these are the top 10 trends, and number 5 is platform engineering. And platform engineering is very much around IDP. And the other piece of information is around the hybrid cloud statistics research here, saying that everyone's struggling because there are now more clouds, and you've got the hybrid strategy as well. So again, it's important that your IDP can cope with those hybrid strategies that you're going to have to adopt. And a little bit on DevOps before I finish. So DevOps is really crucial. We really believe in this, that giving your developers a great experience has massive benefits for the developers and also for an organization as a whole. And an IDP is an ideal way of giving developers a great experience, allowing them to get what they need, allowing them to self-service, but also giving them some flexibility. So the IDP should be configured to meet your developers' needs. That should be one of its core focuses. And again, this comes down to a decision of what type of IDP you're on. Do you buy and install a very prescriptive one, or do you get an open one? We obviously believe an open one that allows you to adopt the tools that you've already got and bake in your practices, as well as adopting best practices is the way to go. We've got another talk on DevOps if that's something you're interested in, that you can go. And finally, our convictions. This is what we truly believe. End users need to be empowered. DevOps really focusing on automation and evangelization. Stop your devs constantly having to repeat, build the wheel, waste time. And everything should be GitOps. We believe GitOps is the way to go, but GitOps isn't the solution. It's just a tool that gets you to where you need to be. And then I will hand over to Olivia.
Thank you very much, Rob. So let's explore now some use cases on why an IDP will support you as an MSP or SI business. So the first one obviously is that an IDP is a self-service portal and an internal developer platform, and which is actually supporting the fact that the end user can actually manage the deployment and all the processes, all the automation in a fully autonomous manner, whatever their skill level, right? So, and this is all about reducing ticketing and so on, and manual processes. And then, of course, you need behind the scene to have end-to-end automation of all the processes so your organization can perform and can be more efficient and be more profitable. And of course, to do that, you need to build automation. So another use case we're going to see is how do you migrate to infrastructure as code at scale when you have some customers, for example, which have not yet done this step and are fully managing all this manually? How do you do to migrate at scale to infrastructure as code? We're going to see also about how do you improve security with DevSecOps at scale. But you also need some governance, right? Because all this automation is of course something that's a little bit the basis. But you need governance, you need a scope, you need to understand how you orchestrate all this automation, who are the actors, and who can do what, and so on. We also will see a use case around observability, because obviously you need to understand who is doing what is happening on the platform, so the stakeholders, the right stakeholders, can have the full visibility around what is going on. And then the final one will be around FinOps, and maybe we touch a little bit about GreenOps as well, to understand how your cloud budget is spent and how it is, how you can control it. So let's go to the first use case. So first use case is all about self-service portal. And this is all about improving the productivity of the organization, which is MSP and SI organization, but also the end customer organization, both of them. And it's also about improving customer satisfaction, because obviously the end user will have the steering wheels in his hands. He can actually do, trigger automation, manage the life cycle of his infrastructure and application on his own, and whatever the skill levels of the end user is. So it's all about giving the right access to the right people so they can do their job in full autonomy. And then by this, we just reduce drastically the need for ticketing system. And overall, the process are much more productive and efficient. It's not only about automation. It can also be about KPIs, dashboard to understand how the automation performs. It can be also, for example, about FinOps modules, giving the right access to your customer so you understand how the cloud budget is spent. And all these tools can be part of the IDP. There is a module about automation, which is called, for example, Stack Form. You can customize deployment and automated process, and it's all about role-based access control. So the IDP will definitely need to have a module where you will be able to define the roles that you will assign to the different users that match the business needs. So now let me show you how this works in the real life. So let's say we want to deploy an infrastructure with Terraform and an application with Ansible on the top of this infrastructure. So this is a Nexus repository in this case. Let's create two environments. So one is going to be deployed on AWS, one other one on Azure. This is a module here you can see on the right where it estimates the cost before deployment. And the form lets you, as a user, configure the environment you would like. And it's not only about the one-time deployment, it's also about managing during the whole life cycle of the application. This is basically a way to scope exactly what are the operations you allow to end user, so they can do this in a full autonomy, but still in a scoped manner. The next use case is about automation itself, because obviously the MSP and SI will build and will manage the automation for the customer, and the customer will use it. And the MSP and SI will still be able to commit on SLA, the contractual SLA, with confidence, because for a simple reason, the MSP and the SI knows exactly what's going on the infrastructure, because he's building and maintaining the automation, and has also tools to make sure some of the security rules, the best practices, and so on are respected. So it's all about building an automation to deliver business value. So automate by, end-to-end processes. And we do that in a full GitOps manner. So meaning really the IDP should really have all the automation inside a Git, where you can version control all the change regarding the pipeline, regarding Terraform, Ansible, or Chef, Puppet, or whatever technology you use, but actually it's completely tracked. And the IDP will be there just to give access to the right user so they can use it in a self-service manner. We call that stack, actually, all this automation. And this stack will really hide all the complexity from this very technical operation to the end user, and the end user will just use it without very much knowledge, technical knowledge. It can be used through the portals, through API, or through CLI typically. So let me show you now another video. So the stack is basically all the automation that is all about pipeline. What is the sequence of tasks that needs to be executed? Launch some Terraform code, for example, some Ansible playbook, some Chef, some Puppet, and you can also design, this web form to configure the different deployment in your different environments, for example. So all this is actually a fully repeatable automation that is versioned in your Git, right? So the MSP will actually provide eventually the Git, or the end user can provide the Git, but in any way, it's managed by MSP or SI, all this automation. The next use case, it's also how does it work, right? So the MSP and customer will use the self-service automation, as you understood already. Then the customer will give some feedback and will collaborate with the MSP and SI, of course, because you will have new business requirements, and of course, the MSP and SI DevOps team will build and maintain and evolve the self-service automation according to the business needs, which in turn, then the end customer will use. So this is a three-step circle that is obviously going all along the life of the project. The next one is about migrating to Infra-as-Code. So imagine as an MSP or SI that you have a new customer, and this customer has actually a lot of production virtual machines, for example, on a public cloud or private cloud, and has not yet done the step towards Infra-as-Code. And that's why he's asking you, to bring DevOps at scale and to help you to do this migration to scale, actually. So for that, you need to have a module that is going to generate the automation for you. And this is what we call infra import, which actually is going to read what is in your cloud provider, what is already deployed, what kind of resources are deployed, and what kind of resources you want to import inside the automation. And suddenly, this is going to create the Terraform code, the Terraform state file, the stack form, as we said before, the pipelines. Basically, all what we call stacks is going to be created in a few minutes for you. This is going to actually drastically differentiate your offering as an MSP and SI and improve profitability as well, because the build time is going to be drastically reduced. You are going to be able to be up and running very fast. We have some customers, for example, like OBS or others that actually have used this module. And we can see that some customers, when you have like thousands of virtual machines running on Azure or GCP or AWS, and then you need to write the Terraform code for all this, it's a big challenge. With that, in a few minutes, it will provide you 80% of the work done, right? So this is a big game changer for that, of course. Now let's have a practical use case and let's import some infrastructure from a cloud provider. So let's take, for example, Google Cloud Platform. So this is the GCP console. We have one database that is a managed database. We have one virtual machine, and let's import that from Cycloid IDP. So let's choose GCP. We select the credential, the location, the project ID, and then the software is going to read what is in the cloud provider. You just have to select what are the resource type you want to import. Just select the IDs you want to import and just enter the specification of the stack, which is the automation that you want to create. This is a summary. This is going to do it now, and you see within a few seconds it is actually pushing all the code in your Git. So here you can see the Terraform code with the managed database we've just created, the virtual machine as well. But it also creates the pipeline and also the stack form. So basically you have a full stack automation that is out of the box directly working. Okay, so we have seen IDP brings you self-service portal. It brings you automation of your end-to-end processes. It can also generate the automation for you in a few clicks. All that is great for sure, and it makes big differentiators and improve profitability. But you also need governance, right? Because you need to have a platform that is going to be the single source of truth to manage all your customers, your BU, your team, your tools, your projects, your cloud. And this is a platform that is a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud that's actually you need, because obviously you will have different requests, different needs from your different customers, and all this needs to be flexible. So it improves the day-to-day operation and decrease the number of tickets for your DevOps, and allow them to focus on what matters, which is automation and evangelization of best practices. So how governance typically is provided? First of all, we have like multi-organization support. So that means it's a multi-tenant platform, right? So on one platform, you can host as many customers as you want as an MSP and SI. Then there is a centralization of all the projects in one place, which that means all the deployments are actually managed in a single view. There is also asset inventory, which is going to browse. You can browse through all the assets that are deployed on the different cloud providers. Dashboards and KPI will make sure you understand how the automation performs. There are modules like InfraView, which is going to provide you visibility on the infrastructure, what your project in terms of Terraform especially has deployed in the cloud provider, and you can see at a glance, a visual representation of this infrastructure. And you have things like logs and events, or who is doing what on the platform, application logs. It's basically a one-stop shop where you have a 360 degrees observability dashboard. So let's go to the next slide. So the next one, the next use case is about security, and especially DevSecOps at scale. How do you make sure security and best practices of your organization is enforced, and especially in a non-intrusive way? Because of course that needs to be adopted. Constraints are not really always good, so you need to enforce all this, but staying non-intrusive, right? So the first thing that is really important is the platform. It can be available as a SaaS offering, but basically for security perspective, you need to have a platform that is deployable on premises as well. And it can be on premises in MSP or SI or in a MSP infrastructure, but it can also be single tenant platforms, for example. And you can then host either one or as many customers as you like. But from security perspective, it's very important that it's in a walled garden and everything is under control by the MSP and or the end customer. From the authentication perspective, it's also very important to have a single sign-on mechanism. Here, for example, we can have like SAML v2, OpenID Connect, who can connect to any identity provider, and this is obviously very important. Also, you can enforce organization best practices and cloud compliance. Imagine you want to enforce ISO 27001 or PCI DSS on AWS, for example. Then you can make some rules, for example, based on open policy agent. And then if there is any deviation, it's going to tell you, oh, there is a deviation here, please correct it. It's not going to correct it for you, obviously, but it's going to detect it so you can take appropriate actions. Then you have credential management. Of course, all the automation doesn't host the secrets, right? So to access your Git, to access your cloud providers, and so on. So you need a vault for that, and the IDP will need to host a vault as well itself. And then you have credential management that is able, to manage your secrets. It's important as well from the CI/CD pipeline perspective to be able to connect to any tools. If you want to enforce, like you want to have a DevSecOps at scale processes, then you need to interact with external security tools like SonarQube or others. And this is what the IDP is doing here by having version artifacts of from different tools and external resources. As long as you have a tool or an API that you can connect to, then your pipeline is able to interact with it and then take appropriate actions depending on what the different security tools returns to you. And all this is really important, of course, to have DevSecOps at scale. And you need to have API keys, obviously, to manage API keys to access the API of the IDP as well. So let's see how governance and security topics translate into a real-world example. So in the interface, first of all, you can see we can manage multiple organizations, which is the way how to have a multi-tenant platform. So basically, you have one organization typically per end customer. Then you can manage your users, your team. You can assign roles as well to your different users and team. And you can create actually your role out of the box with this module where you can say what action is allowed in what module and then assign them to the user. And finally, you have an infra policy module enforcing best practices and security rules for your whole organization. The last piece that we have here is about FinOps. I mean, it's about cloud consumption and how your budget can get out of control. It's very difficult sometimes, to understand why my budget is increasing so much and to analyze all the evolution and to do the cost analysis. So, and the IDP typically will help you as well to do that. So, it's all about regaining control of your cloud budget while upskilling your teams as well on FinOps. So because knowledge is extremely important to be able, to take appropriate actions. So the first thing that you should be able to provide is a cost estimation. So when someone like an end user deploys an infrastructure, it must be able to understand how much this deployment will cost for his company, right? So, and this is what we call cost estimation. Basically, before deployment, it will estimate the cost of the application or the infrastructure you are about to deploy before any deployment. It can avoid, unexpected excessive cloud bills that you didn't see beforehand. There is another module that is very important, it's cost management, and it's all about cost analysis. So it's all about once the services has been billed to your organization, understand how the different services are spending your budget and over time, obviously. So you can understand how the different projects, the different services, your different cloud providers are spending your budget, and you can even have some budget management, like with defining a scope for your budget, and then have some thresholds and alarms to understand, for example, if that kind of project or deployment or service exceed a certain amount of budget, if some alarms. And also, the IDP is also doing the automation. So here, what we want to do and what we do is actually to link the cost management to the automation. This is very important for the cost analysis. Basically, when you have an increase of the cost between, for example, 2 days ago and yesterday, you can see that you have a 20% increase on a specific service, for example, and you want to understand why. And this is where it's very important to link the FinOps tool to the automation and then to the asset inventory, so you can see actually the reason, the core root reason why there has been this 20% increase in terms of cost and what has caused this. So, for example, it's an increase of data transfer between region, or it's just an increase of an instance type that someone has done in the automation. So it will just give you the reason, and that's very important. And then there is also, for private cloud, quota management, because obviously automation is great, but you don't want it to be open bar, open to anyone. You need to have some sort of control. That's what budget management is doing for public cloud, and that's what quota management is doing for private cloud. That's where you are going to define what amount of resources in terms of CPU, memory, storage you want to allocate to different teams, and you can enforce that that team will not spend or will not use actually more resources than what a manager has defined for that team. And then, of course, the last piece is the role-based access control. I talked about it a little bit earlier. This is all about, controlling who is doing what, and obviously it applies to FinOps as well. So let's see now some real-world example of these FinOps features. So the first one is cost management, which is really about cost analysis of the billing data of your different cloud providers. So we can build here, as you can see, reporting based on your different project that you have deployed, and you can follow up on different dimensions like service and environment. In this case, you can filter down on different aspects like the region, so you can adjust the figures exactly as you want to display them. And the second one is cost estimation. Here, when you deploy, for example, on AWS a service using a certain infrastructure, you can have an estimation of the cost before it's actually deployed. So basically, as a conclusion, you have an IDP will provide a self-service platform, so the end user for your customers can use automation out of the box without having any technical knowledge and in full autonomy, and it will bring more satisfaction for them. You will have automation, of course. So automation is the MSP DevOps team that is going to manage this for the end customer typically. You have infra import that is going to help and differentiate your offering and be more profitable in the build phase. You have governance, which is a very important piece as well, how to orchestrate all this, how to make all the pieces moving together. You have the security aspect and DevSecOps especially. And finally, you have the FinOps aspect of it, that you can also give access to your end customers so they can understand how they consume their cloud budget. I haven't talked about GreenOps, but you can also have an extension of the FinOps module where you can have the carbon emission in addition of the currency or the budget, right? So you can understand how your action to reduce carbon emission on your different cloud providers and your different projects take effect in practice. So you can see the carbon emission reduction in this kind of reports as well. So that's basically how an IDP will help an MSP and SI to differentiate their offering and to increase their profitability. If you have any questions now, we are ready to take them.
So we got 3 questions actually. Well, I'll take the first one. You might have some opinions on this as well, Olivier. But what is driving the demand for internal developer platforms? So I think there's multiple things that are happening in the industry which are creating the demand. The move to cloud definitely is one of them, and I think aligned to the move to cloud is the fact that infrastructure as code is now becoming the default way to deploy, and you need some way to manage that. And the automation around that kind of deployment. So I think the move to the cloud and those technologies certainly are some of the drivers. And I think on the human side, I think the drive for a better developer experience. Developers have been basically filling the gap. They've been cobbling together platforms to provide these types of services themselves and using their skills and valuable company resources to do this. I think that's also been identified as an area where potential savings and efficiency improvements can be made by using a platform which is designed for that purpose. I don't know, Olivier, do you have any further thoughts on that?
No, I think it's good. You want me to answer the OBS use case part now?
Yes,
or
please.
do you... Yeah, okay. So OBS is a long-term partner, of course, from Cycloid, and the initial challenge they face and why they went with an IDP is because they basically decided to build a homemade portal actually, and it was very difficult to maintain. And also there was a lot of automation per business unit and not really federation on the different cloud practice, private and public cloud. There was also a very highly complex tools of ecosystem of tools where actually all the business units was using a different set of tools, and all of this make it quite complicated as well. So they adopted an IDP, a Cycloid IDP actually, and what's the outcome? So the outcome was accelerating the design, the build, and the run process for their new customers by around 50%. And they use Infra-Import, for example. They use, the generation of the automation to build automatically the stacks, and that drastically, increased the delivery time, so it can be much more efficient. And it's also a portal that is multi-cloud, so whatever the customers, their needs in terms of multi-cloud, the platform can address it. It also optimized day-to-day operation by reducing tickets creation, and basically we've seen like 70% reduction in terms of ticket creation, which is a huge reduction, obviously. And last but not least, there was also the automation is accessible to their customers directly. So and this with OBS without worrying actually on the contractual SLA, because they don't lose control on security and governance, because they actually manage the automation. But still, their customers have the steering wheel in their hands to trigger the automation and to use them in full autonomy directly using Cycloid portal.
Great, thanks, Olivier. So I think that's all the questions answered. If this has been interesting and you want some more information, you can contact us at cycloid.io. Go take a look at the website. See, there's a lot more demos on there. If you're interested in doing a trial, just there's a form there you can fill in. We're happy to give you a trial, show you how the Cycloid IDP works. Or if you're just interested generally in the subject, ask us questions. We're happy to respond by email. So, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, and look out for some more Cycloid webcasts coming. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.